This is going to be a different sort of video, one I don't think you're going to see out there in a majority of places. Maybe there's a good reason for that, I guess we'll see. I've had some newcomers to the sport of adventure riding recently reach out to me with questions on how to best get started in the sport. So I thought I'd make a quick, casual video sharing my 2 cents. I've been riding and camping off my motorcycle for, well, longer than I care to admit. Decades. Since I was a kid. In that time, I've seen the full spectrum of gear. From being able to use and test new cutting-edge products, as well as being forced to be creative on my own if I wanted to get out on the trail. In that time, I've formed some opinions I think might help someone new to the sport, and I thought I'd take a moment to share those with you. So, does your gear really matter? The short answer is, kind of. You have to pick your battles. However, before we get into gear, I want to start off by saying that the biggest component and the true foundational piece to the success of your foray into this sport is you. If you yourself are mentally set up correct, pretty much the rest of your gear will fall into place. What do I mean by that? Before you even begin exploring this sport, be truthful with yourself as to what you really want out of this. I'm not going to even call it a sport, but a mindset. A mindset that can create a new and life-changing way of life for you if you let it. Sometimes, when we embark on a new life adventure, we convince ourselves this is exactly what I need, and we don't necessarily do it with the truest of intentions or all the facts present at the time. We hope this new, unknown thing is going to be what makes us happy, but in the back of our mind, sometimes we know we're really doing this for all the wrong reasons, or we find out quickly this isn't as advertised on Instagram. And after investing heavily, we find ourselves out of our element and not really enjoying the current moment in front of us. None of us need that. And this is a sport you really don't want to find yourself out of your element, especially in the beginning stages or for the wrong reasons. So my first recommendation is get your mind right. Start off slow and ease into it. You have plenty of time to get it right, so enjoy the journey into all of this. If you're completely new to motorcycles, or even if you've been riding forever but just haven't gotten around to getting your license, I recommend taking a class to do so. Oregon has what they call Team Oregon, an inexpensive weekend course one can take, and at the end of the weekend you get your endorsement. It's fantastic. Plus, many insurance companies will offer a substantial discount on their rates to class graduates. I took the Team Oregon class for my endorsement and absolutely loved it. I'd been riding for decades at that point, and I still learned a ton. You ride bikes all weekend, starting with the absolute basics of basics, by just sitting on the bike, and you go all the way through the process of being completely roadworthy. It's a great way to go. If something similar is offered in your area, start there. You can't go wrong. Once you're legal and have a bike to ride, find what you like about riding and what you don't, and do that by experience, not by what you think you should like or being told what you should like. Take progressively longer and longer rides. Then start to put yourself in a little more of an uncomfortable situation, like riding in the rain or a little colder conditions than you're used to. If your mindset passes that test and you want more, then you can move into the next step. This is about finding your mental line, about finding out if you can truly love the bad as much as the good, and at what level does the bad outweigh the good. Once you start to see that line, you can continue on to bigger things. If that line comes quickly, there's no harm in that. Now you know. It's okay if some of this is not for you, or you have a different level of involvement than your friend or neighbor or internet troll. Some love suffering in the elements. Some only like the most perfect of conditions. And there's no wrong or right answer here, despite what anyone says. It's only correct if it's coming from you and what you truly want. Concentrate on you at this beginning stage. Find your line and build up a foundation of fun before going any further. You'll know if and when you want to take the next step if you listen to yourself. Really, the easiest way to do all this seems a bit counterintuitive, but is not to listen to anyone else about this stuff except you. Only you know what you like and what you don't, so go within and start there. Now, don't get me wrong, I am not saying riding with buddies is bad. On the contrary, there isn't anything much better than that. Riding with friends, I think, is one of the best things people can do. What I am saying is, if you let it, a person can find themselves on a bike. And that journey is a solo individual journey. If you can find the love there alone, this sport will open itself up to you in ways you can't even imagine at this point. So I recommend getting out there on some rides alone, especially in the beginning, and see what glares back at you. What do you love and what are you nervous about? Then you can make a game plan from there. Now I love to watch YouTube videos about gear. New lightweight tents, the latest electronics, the works. It's addictive and fun to immerse yourself in that whole thing, especially in the off-season. However, with that can come a sense of, I don't have what I need to have a fun or successful trip. And that's absolutely not true. We live in a consumer-based society, and it can be easy to unconsciously fall under its spell from time to time. I've been guilty of it. We all have. A lot of the time, we allow this idea of not having certain gear dampen our ability to enjoy our trip or even keep us from taking one to begin with. Honestly, your journey is not about interacting with high-end stuff. It's about being out there, the journey itself. Comparison is the death of joy, and that applies here. Especially when you're starting out, but really at any stage, get the gear you can afford and what works for you and use it in the conditions you also enjoy and go from there. Really, don't worry about it at this stage if the gear isn't perfect, because even if you buy the best stuff right off the bat, you'll most likely end up changing it later once you know more about the sport and what you're doing within it, so starting out with less expensive gear isn't a bad thing. I've seen way too many people put themselves way too much in debt or add heavy amounts of unneeded stress to their life just because they think their only option for having a successful trip is either massively expensive gear or it's basically out of reach, and that's simply not true. Back in my shop days, we used to refer to this gear mentality as identity by retail. I would get these guys in the shop who would want the most expensive bikes and gear simply because their buddy had it or they didn't want to be ridiculed as not having the best. I've actually had many people tell me when I'd show them something, they felt they should spend more, so they would, for no benefit to them other than their ego. And that's the irony here. Usually those guys didn't even use the gear they bought. The sport was more of a status thing than a life thing. Don't fall into that category. Hey, there's nothing wrong with having the best. I like the best as much as anyone. Who doesn't want the best? But if you're just starting out or money is an issue, I'd first have a very honest conversation with yourself as to why you're doing this in the first place, because suffering can occur even with the best stuff. Really, it's not a sustainable goal to simply want cool gear for cool gear's sake. It's about fostering a craving for the road itself, and with that, the right gear for what you're doing will fall into place once you know your place within the sport. Just my opinion. Okay, with all that exposition aside, all of these gear choices are about picking your battles and building from there. You're dealing in the world of finites. One finite might be the amount of money you have to spend. The others are space on the bike and the weight it can carry. So with that, all these gear choices are about picking your battles and building your kit from there. First off, let's start with the bike. It doesn't really matter. If you ride within the reliability distance of both your bike's current state as well as your ability to repair it while on the road, and close to the intended purpose the bike was originally designed for, the bike really doesn't matter. If you like your bike, that's really all that matters. Be kind to it, respect it, and it'll return all that to you. I still have my 25-year-old WR400 and I love that bike. I actually have two. We've seen and been through a lot together, and I enjoy riding and traveling with them now as much as I did 2+ decades ago, and they really do great. So, get a bike that you want to ride, one that speaks to you. After having your mental foundation in place, what I've found to be the most important thing that does matter in your gear department, regardless as to what anyone else thinks, is get the main gear that you need to be comfortable on your trip to best enjoy the days and time on the road, indefinitely. What do I mean by that? Too many people get fixated on statistics rather than real-world results. And remember, you can go on a trip with just a tarp and a Swiss Army knife, and there's going to be someone out there ridiculing you for taking too much gear. So my recommendation is, again, don't listen to anyone but yourself. Don't fall for the narrative many people put out there as to what you're allowed to carry with you in your travels and what they think is stupid. Case in point, I am a professional non-sleeper. I am also an exclusive side sleeper. These little micro-sized, ultra-lightweight sleeping pads don't work for me. I've tried just about every style out there, spent way too much money on stuff I don't use, and none of them have worked. After about a day or two on the road, I'm shot, and I'm not enjoying the trip anymore. This is what I meant by you need to get what allows you to enjoy the trip. To take care of my issues, I finally settled on something most everyone probably thinks is a ridiculous choice for a sleeping pad, but it works great for me and my issues. I spent years of having bad nights on the prejudices of everyone else, and where are they when it didn't work for me? Well, I'm not doing this for anyone else, so their opinions that I made the wrong choice really doesn't matter, and that's okay. So, to solve my issues, I use an Xped Megamat long wide sleeping pad, and it's great. Yeah, it's huge, but having it ensures I can enjoy the night, which means I can enjoy any length of trip. And that makes it pretty much a no-brainer. It keeps me warm, it's rated to negative 59 degrees below zero, and it feels like my bed at home. Being the non-sleeper I am, I need all the help I can get in this department, so I don't mind sacrificing more precious luggage space, weight allotment, and money allowance to this piece of gear, and this works for me. And I'll pay the sacrifice in size and storage. Maybe you don't need to have that extreme of a sleeping solution, and that's great. That's money in your adventure bike bank, and you can use it on what you do need. Keeping the weight and size of something to a minimum is obviously the goal, but it can't come at the cost of you not doing or enjoying the trip. Maybe you have to have some fancy coffee device or other items to make the trip more enjoyable indefinitely. It's all about picking your battles. And one of mine was my sleeping arrangements. Another semi-big bulky thing I take with me that I will not be without is my collapsible folding chair. I camped for decades without one, and to be brutally honest, I have zero idea how I got by without it. They're wonderful. I personally recommend going with the full-size higher back style. I've used both, and the small-size chairs are great, but once you go with the full-size bigger back, you won't ever go back. They aren't that much bigger to carry than the small ones, and the extra weight is negligible. Again, it's about picking your battles. Get what you know you need and slim down on what you don't. The other part of my gear that I spent real money on was my helmet. I have sensitive ears, and I wanted as quiet of a helmet as I could get. I've never had any issues with modestly priced helmets, but getting what I have has really helped me on long multi-day trips. Other than those critical items, most of my other gear is well over 20 years old. I bought my tent, sleeping bag, cooking kit, except for my firebox pans, and stove all in 2004, and they still work great. So keep in mind that there are much less expensive and used options for items that don't totally dictate the success of your trip. Those items don't seem to be the pivotal items that hold me back on a trip, so I use what I already have, and they could be replaced in a used market relatively inexpensively. That's what I mean by picking your battles. Those aren't hills I'm going to die on, but my sleeping pad, yeah. Another aspect I feel is a foundational part of your gear is your toolkit. I was a motorcycle mechanic for over 10 years, so I maybe have a bit of a different take on this than most, but I think my conclusion is sound. Whenever I work on the bike, no matter what I'm doing, I use the tools I carry with me. If that tool doesn't work or does a bad job, I replace it with one that does. If I run into an issue I can't take care of with my toolkit, I add the tool I need to my toolkit. Yeah, my personal toolkit is probably a bit more substantial than probably many out there, but I'd rather carry a couple extra pounds to have what I need to get back home rather than face the alternative. There are lots of creative ways of slimming that kit down and lots of videos on the subject on how to do so. From good multi-tools that actually work to modifying other tools to work better for your application. This is an important foundational piece to your gear, so spend time in getting it right. Also, spending time on working on your own bike will also help with the mental side of all this dramatically. Preparation is more than the materials you carry, it's mostly mental. Getting familiar with your bike, how it actually works, really is one of the most foundational pieces to the puzzle for a successful trip. It can't be overstated. Install your own tires, change your own chain and sprockets, change your own oil, spark plugs, and service your own air filters. Knowing how to do all that will contribute more to the success of your trip than any other piece of gear. Critical thinking shuts off in the face of anxiety, and getting any excuse for anxiety as far from your mental state as possible is crucial for having a good trip. Working on your bike should be fun. This foray into adventure riding should be more than just twisting a throttle. Not that there's anything wrong with that if it isn't. But if it isn't, then you had better compensate for that fact by covering those unforeseen factors with other ways to combat issues encountered on your ride, like different route choices, accessible money in the bank, and other resources available to you. Again, it's knowing where you stand going into all this that will dictate your gear, preparedness, and route choices. So be honest with yourself at the beginning and start there. It's more important than it sounds. Hey, I know this gear video isn't as much about gear as you probably wanted to hear, but I haven't heard anyone else really push the mental side of the sport, and that's the most important factor and where everything else rests on. So if you get that right from the beginning, you'll be light years ahead of where you'd be without it. One other item I'd recommend is some sort of emergency communication device, like a Spot or InReach. I won't go into the details of each, other than saying depending upon how far you want to get into this sport, having a device like these is most likely a wise choice. So far, as of the recording of this video, the InReach Mini 2 is my current choice, but it doesn't have to be yours. All of them have pros and cons. I like the idea of being able to use the device to text non-emergency messages, so do a little research into this and see what you think is best for you. As far as what choices of luggage, soft cases or hard, rackless hemispherical saddlebags versus panniers, there really isn't a wrong choice. It's really about what you're doing. I personally use soft bags on everything. I like the safety factor of soft bags off-road when compared to hard cases. However, I know lots of people who ride off-road exclusively with hard cases, and they've been just fine. Hard cases allow you to take more stuff with you, which can be good and can be bad. I'm not going to spend too much time here, as there are tons of videos online addressing this issue, but I will say most of these are quite expensive. Where I will try to help the beginner here is, if cost is preventing you from getting out there, be creative. I made both of my first sets of luggage for my bikes before I could afford to buy actual gear. One of my first luggage setups I made way back in 2003 was for my WR. It was made out of 2 Army surplus backpacks, zip-tied together. I would then stuff my sleeping bag between the 2 backpacks and strap the whole setup on my bike. It worked great. It got me out there. Sure, it wasn't as robust as my later pro-built gear, but I took it easy on it, and it worked just fine for me for over 7 years of mostly off-road riding. Later in 2017, when I bought my Africa Twin, I made a set of panniers by using some large bicycle touring saddlebags I found for less than $100. I modified them to attach to my luggage racks. I also bungee strapped extra bags onto those panniers and then covered the whole thing with waterproof backpack covers. It worked great and didn't look too bad either. I rode for 3 seasons and thousands of miles with that setup, and it never gave me any issues. So yeah, be creative if you have to. Everyone buys their gear multiple times, not just the poor adventure rider. So don't be afraid to start out cheap if you have to learn what you actually want and need. The last important foundational piece to all of this, I think, is worth putting up fairly high on your priority list. It's your bike suspension. This really can't be ignored, but I'm guilty of it, so I understand if you think it doesn't sound like it should be a priority when you have limited funds. When you have an idea of what it is you want to do and what gear you're going to carry with you, weigh yourself and your gear you're carrying with you and get your bike suspension set up accordingly. Proper suspension setup is crucial for the handling and safety of the bike. A very large majority of the time, your bike is going to come undersprung for what you want to do with it. So a replacement of at least the springs is usually a mandatory change. This is something to address sooner than later and something to make a priority. Once completed, you'll be more glad you did it than you thought you would be. It's like getting a new bike. However, understand this is one of those slippery slope subjects where if you listen to too many people in the know, they'll make it sound like you need to spend thousands of dollars to do it right. Yes, in the case of suspension, it's usually the fact that the more money you spend, the better the performance. And you can spend a lot. However, probably over 90% of the time, all we really need to do is make sure our suspension's preload and spring rate is correct for the combined weight of what we're carrying, which includes ourselves. Changing out the springs and oil isn't an overly expensive expense, especially when it's compared to what is gained, so start there. Everything else about your bike suspension is probably fine. It just needs to be set up for your weight. It's a foundational piece. An undersprung and overloaded bike is more dangerous than most people realize and can get you in trouble fast. And you want no part of that. Take the time and money to make this right. It's important. Well, that's about it for this video. I know this isn't your typical review type of video you and I usually find ourselves watching, but I at least wanted to address a few foundational things I haven't seen much out there in the YouTube universe. Getting those aspects right and in mind at the beginning will both keep you safer as well as contribute more to the enjoyment of the sport. Hey, I want you to get hooked on this as much as I am, and the understanding of these fundamentals first will put you ahead of the curve. Let me know if you want me to take this a step further and focus on specifics. I can do some gear reviews, tires, some budget-friendly options, whatever you want. This channel is still in its infancy, so let me know what you want to see more of. Thanks again for hanging out. Take care, and I'll see you soon.